All right, please come in, find yourself a seat. We're going to get going. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you all enjoyed your lunch. Thank you for being so efficient, getting up 9 floors, back down 9 floors, navigating the elevator riddles and all that stuff. That's great. Once again, my name is Douglas Judson. I'm the chair of FOLA. I'm here with our first vice chair, Sam Misheal, and our second vice chair, Allen Wynperle. And we are going to deliver the next session just talking about FOLA's road ahead. And we're going to touch on a couple things. You see them on the slides in front of you. The purpose of this session is to provide you with some further insight into the work underway by FOLA, and also to assure you that that work is part of a plan. And that plan takes into account what our role is, what opportunities and challenges we see on the horizon for you, our constituents, and your members, and the type of advocacy profile that we want to build for FOLA, and more importantly for law associations in the months and years ahead. And so our plan for this session is to provide you with a fairly high-level overview of three things. The first is our new strategic plan. The second is what you can expect from us in the upcoming venture election. And then very briefly to touch on a matter related to paralegals and courthouse libraries. Time permitting, we'll take a couple questions or comments, but I know there is a really jam-packed, learn-intensive session right after this one, and if we can budget some time to give you more in there, we'd like to wrap this one up a little faster. So that's our game plan for the next block of the day. So our new strategic plan was the product of a planning retreat our board and committee chairs had back in August, where we reflected on our recent accomplishments, where we are, where we want to go as an organization, and then set out to plot how we might get there. And with so many faces at plenary, I think it's useful to start this conversation today revisiting what FOLA is and what space we occupy in the law and justice sector. Some of this is obvious to enough of you in the room. We are a federation of county and district law associations. Some of you date back to antiquity. We have a number of, not individuals, your associations. Mine was incorporated in 1909. I don't know if anyone can beat that, but there we go, got a couple. And those reflect the growth of legal services and the legal profession in Ontario as the expansion of those law associations. What FOLA has emerged as today is that we are a unique voice for the lawyers that those 46 associations represent. And what sets us apart are these things you see on the slide. So first, we represent associations whose members are in all regions of the province. And when we put out a call for comment on something that's going on in our field, we have direct engagement with boots on the ground in every part of Ontario from Kenora to Cornwall. And while other associations might have provincial membership, the fact is that our governance structure formalizes that regional approach. And the result of that is that our feedback closely aligns with one of the statutory mandates of the Law Society, which is to provide access to justice for the people of Ontario. That means all of Ontario. And so FOLA is very uniquely positioned to be able to provide that perspective from the bar across the province. Second, we voice concerns mostly for practicing lawyers who are on the front lines of legal service delivery. I think that's been evident by some of the comments that were shared earlier today. Some people call this people law. It's a term I heard for the first time at a recent conference. Basically legal services provided from Main Street law offices, helping everyday people and their businesses and organizations with legal problems and transactions. And by extension, we are really the only legal association that broadly represents lawyers in sole practice and small firms. And we can do that really credibly. And an example of that, where we've been able to flex that muscle, is on the recent consult on the mandatory minimum compensation. There were people in that debate who said, oh, this is gonna hurt soles and smalls, like there's concerns here. Well, the people we heard from law associations felt differently. And as the voice of a constituency that can speak credibly for those organizations, we were able to influence that debate, resulting in the policy that was described earlier today. And third, we speak for underrepresented areas of practice. And while there may be many associations out there that are built around a specific purpose area, such as criminal law or family law, there are fewer voices who can provide knowledgeable input on issues on areas such as real estate or other parts of solicitor practice that don't necessarily have as many dedicated associations. And so, as many of you may know, our real estate chair is working really hard on issues such as the identity verification policy, and there's an opportunity for FOLA to be a strong voice on those issues where there aren't as many other voices singing from the same song sheet. So it's from that position that we believe we're equipped to best support law associations by advancing these 4 priorities in the months ahead. Well, 1, we want to improve our communications. 2, we want to influence decision makers. 3, we want to sustain and support your associations. And lastly, we want to provide practice resources. And so I'm just going to briefly touch on each of those and unpack it a little bit so you have a sense of where we are going. First, our first goal is to continue to work to build awareness among and on behalf of frontline lawyers in Ontario's regions. And what this means is that we see communications as a two-way street. We want to get relevant information to law associations and their members, but we also want to help relay your perspective from your practices to decision makers that impact your work and your clients. And how are we going to do that? Well, first, we're in the process of rebranding the organization and redeveloping our web profile so that the information you need and the resources that we've been providing can be made easier to find, and so that the content that we push out publicly reflects a fresh corporate image that stands for the network of county and district law associations we support. Second, we will continue to develop meaningful and persuasive submissions to official consults, and you can expect continued outreach to you on those matters to get your input, whether that's on an issue before MAG, the courts, or the Law Society, or one that you want us to pursue that no one's asked us what we think, because there's plenty of those. And we'll continue to massage all of your feedback that we receive into those submissions on those topics. And the submissions we make do carry a lot of weight with decision makers, particularly at convocation. And I do want to flag again that we are currently working to prepare a submission on the Law Society's mandatory succession planning consult, which you heard about before lunch. Third, we are continuing to develop our media relations. Just by an example of the success we've seen recently, trying to think about what's the communications angle to things that we're putting out into the justice sector or communicating to regulators. I don't know if any of you get those Law Times or Canadian Lawyer emails that have the top stories in them. One of the last ones, sorry, it's the Law Society trying to take someone out again. So if you see those newsletters, they have the top stories from the last week in Lawyerland, and the top 3 of one of the last ones that came out were all stories that related to issues that FOLA was working on, where we had written something or we had put something out or sent an open letter. And so we're shaping the debate effectively and trying to think about how we can not just push some of these issues privately, but what the public angle of them is so that we can start conversations that way. What I want to emphasize on that, and you heard a bit earlier from Katie about helping your associations tell their stories as well, is that sometimes when we get stuff from the legal press, it's great, but it's also kind of preaching to the choir, because you guys all know what issues are going on in the justice sector. And when we want to generate political will behind problems, sometimes we can penetrate that popular awareness a little better when we put stuff in mainstream media, when we see op-ed writing that relays things to the experience of the consumers of legal services. And so we want to continue to do that type of work as well and talk about what those, what the impacts of some of our, our regulations and governing statutes are on everyday people. And finally, we're working to apply a lens to our communications that is practice specific. So as I mentioned earlier, we know we're one of the only voices for some areas of practice, and we know that for the communications we share with law associations, we need to improve how we present those so that the most relevant information on a given area of practice is given to the right people. We know that all of you are fielding a fire hose of communications from your law associations, the OBA, and others on a daily basis, and we don't want to contribute to that overload. Our second priority is that we want to continue the work of influencing our justice sector regulators, officials, and governments. The activities you can expect to see from us relate to the bencher election. I will get into more detail on that later. We also remain active in consultative bodies and working groups, including the Alliance for Sustainable Legal Aid, which Terry spoke about earlier, and the working groups for the Superior Court and Small Claims Court, as well as the Treasurer's Liaison Group. As we emerge from the pandemic, we're also looking forward to a return to our popular Lobby Day. Katie referred to that earlier, and that's an important occasion because I think that many of our lawmakers don't necessarily have a direct interface with their law association, especially if they themselves are not from the justice community or don't have experience in it. So it's a great opportunity to build relationships with your voices at Queen's Park or maybe even in the federal parliament in the future. And so you can expect opportunities to participate in that. And finally, we'll also soon see a new class of benchers taking office, and we hope to reach out to them soon after they do so that we can continue a constructive dialogue on some of the issues facing county and district associations. Our third priority is that we're working to sustain law associations. And what we mean by that is that we want to ensure that you are equipped for membership growth and leadership succession. And as Katie mentioned, these are not novel problems in Ontario. They're problems that law associations are feeling across North America after the pandemic, when all of us got to cloister ourselves in sweatpants and didn't have to go to things. So we want to support you to continue to grow your membership and to plan for the future. We have recognized a need to do a better job identifying best practices and sharing ideas for law associations that might be struggling to maintain membership levels or to even re-engage existing members. And in the months ahead, we've committed to undertake a review of FOLA's committee structure and the format and sequence of these plenaries too. And the purpose of that is to consider whether there's a plenary format that could return greater value to law associations, whether we need to have two in-person plenaries. Perhaps one of them should adopt a more regionalized, localized approach, or even should be partially online. And so we want to look at those efforts to modernize too, and whether that's something that would serve the needs of law associations. Our last priority is that we want to protect and grow practice resource centers, which is what your courthouse libraries are now known as. And the most obvious part of this is a financial issue. We are, of course, pleased that Convocation saw fit to provide LEARN with its requested levy increase late last month. And that was due in no small part to the outreach of law associations and their members to benchers to make sure it was understood and undeniable what the value of those institutions is to your practices and your communities where you work. I want to make no mistake that libraries are on the ballot in this bencher election. I think you heard this last night from our guest speaker at dinner. And the simple reality is that there are perhaps members of Convocation, whether those are incumbents or new candidates that get elected, who might talk a big game about the support of courthouse libraries, but whose records and actions may not actually measure up to that support. So we remain concerned and observing what's going on in that political world, because the results of the next bencher election could be detrimental to courthouse libraries if law association members don't vote or simply don't understand what is on the line when they cast their ballot. We'll talk more about the bencher election in a few minutes. The other parts of our priority for libraries relate to their management, and we continue to be actively engaged with LEARN, which is setting policy for the modern library network it is building. Our role is to make sure that those policies, as best they can, make sense for associations from an operational perspective. And we're also aware that some of your libraries have ongoing recruitment, retention, and staffing issues in some locations, and that some libraries simply have inadequate physical space in their courtroom, and I've heard that from a few centers as well. So those are all issues that FOLA wants to support you on, and that are related to our advocacy for sustainable funding from the Law Society. Moving to the next piece of this, the bencher election, which no doubt will be consuming more and more of our attention in the months ahead. I see it's already consuming much of Law Twitter's attention over the last couple days, but it will be coming mainstream soon. Our objectives in this race are very simple. One, we want to make sure that the candidates' views on the top-line issues are known. We want to identify what those top-line issues are so that you are informed of those areas. And then, most importantly, we want to help you to get your members to vote and to make that process as seamless as possible. We will be distributing a questionnaire to candidates that touches on our main issues, and that will be used to identify our FOLA-friendly candidates. And this distinction is based on 3 factors. The first will be the candidate's engagement with their county or district law association. The second will be the candidate's support for properly funded courthouse-based practice resource centers or libraries. And third is the candidate's support for a sustainably funded legal aid system. On the library piece, when we say properly funded, we will be clear on what that means. It means funding from the Law Society that will meet the inflationary pressures libraries are and will enable Learn to meet its mandate to build an effective modern system of practice resource centers. Because there is ongoing confusion or misinformation, depending who you talk to on this point. And it's important that properly funded be understood as funding that supports the statutory mandate of the Law Society to uphold high standards of competence for lawyers, and libraries serve that purpose. It doesn't mean funding from the Law Foundation on its own. I want to be very explicit about that, and that will be canvassed in our questionnaire. So you can expect some signals in the bencher election from us that flag those FOLA-friendly candidates that are friends and whose records demonstrate support of your courthouse libraries. If you want me to name names, you'll have to find me in the hospitality suite later. So the last piece of our slide deck is just on practice resource centers and paralegals, and actually I'm going to turn it to Allen just to provide a bit of context on this one.
Yeah, I think more and more the issue of paralegals and their access to libraries is an issue. Bylaw 13 of the Law Society indicates that lawyer members will have access to association libraries and the core library services as Learn is defining in their new policy. But, from a number of quarters, including the paralegals themselves, access to libraries becomes an issue, and certainly as the competence of paralegals becomes more of an issue, as their scope of practice may be expanded or not, certainly their access to libraries is certainly going to become more and more of an issue. As is their contribution towards the libraries, from our perspective, very much an issue. Because right now, the lawyers do pay a levy each year to sustain all of our libraries, but the paralegals don't pay that levy. So, from our point of view, at minimum, they would certainly have to share in that costing on a reasonable basis. So I think that's really the only thing that I wanted to say about that.
Thanks for that. We are, as planned, ahead of schedule, so I did want to open it up in case there were any questions or comments. Do you want to add something, Sam?
There is just one comment that I'd like to make. Thanks for stealing my thunder, but in any event, no, on a serious note, Doug made or mentioned a very important key point, and that is funding to Learn that comes from the Law Society and not from the Federation. Foundation, sorry. So you have to be very careful, because you're going to hear that, yeah, we're not opposed to funding or supporting Learn, but they don't want it coming out of the Law Society, they want it coming out of the Foundation. So again, and I emphasize on that point because it makes a whole lot of difference.
And just for context on that as well, a part of the apprehension that we have there is that the Law Foundation's funding is variable. It depends on varying economic conditions from year to year, trust balances, et cetera. A large portion of the funding, I believe, is also committed to legal aid already. So, we've already heard concerns today about what's available for legal aid resources. So I don't think any of us want to impinge on that. But I think the last piece is that Convocation, I don't think, has direct control over what happens to Law Foundation money either. So it's not exactly a reliable and sole source to support the ambitious and needed mandate that libraries have been given.
Can I
Yes.
add to that a little bit?
Yes.
Just 1 second.
Thank you. Just to add to that, for those of you I haven't met yet, my name is Teresa Leach. I'm going up there next to represent Learn. When it comes to the Law Foundation's funding, they used to provide funding to the library system several years ago. They haven't for many years. We've engaged in discussion with them a few times over the past few years. They're very focused on public-facing initiatives. So we will continue to talk to them. We will continue to look down that avenue. But just to chime in on the not to expect the funding from the Law Foundation, that's not something that we anticipate happening anytime soon, outside of perhaps some special projects that we could get involved in with them that are directly public-facing. They're just not interested in participating in sort of an ongoing operational support of Learn. Never say never, but I think it's a very important point that if the benchers are talking about Law Foundation funding, that is not something that I believe is currently on the table or will be anytime soon.
Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Are there other questions or comments on this? We have a few minutes to spend before we over here.
So I'm Betty Dykstra. I have sort of two roles in this with regards to the questions with regards to paralegals in the library. I run the library at York Regional Association, and I'm a licensed paralegal, partly so I could complain about the Law Society and have skin in the game. Not really, but I don't practice. I'm really pleased to see that you're bringing this up because the library's role is really about competence, and it's nice to see the change and with regards to how paralegals are sort of being perceived. I mean, I can remember years ago it was like, no. And I'm really glad to see the progression because there is so much that the libraries can offer the paralegals with regards to competence. I think part of the there's bencher issues, like paralegal bencher issues, because we have had one that came in and said, well, I can get everything I want from Can Lee, which I thought was like a little, close-minded. But we allow paralegals in our library. We do charge them the annual library fee. And the paralegals who do use our library, they're not members of our association, but they are library users. And they really see the benefit and have been asking when is this change going to happen?
Yeah.
Because they see the amount of, the availability of resources.
Well, the reason why we use that term practice resource center is I think we would all acknowledge that our libraries are more than books on a shelf or even a computer terminal or anything like that. There is a lot of mentoring which goes on every day informally, whether it's in a lounge or whether it's in the stacks or whatever. There's a lot of CPD which is put on by a number of associations, which is extremely important. I certainly get my core update for my competency through the Hamilton Law Association, have since, for 28 years. And, if it's good for myself and my colleagues, why is it not good for paralegals? Of course it is the answer. And again, we're going to continue to be facing issues about the competency of paralegals, the expansion of the scope of practice, all of these things. They have to go hand in hand, but also the funding model has to come with that as well, because it is going to put pressure on people like yourself to manage that, because we rely upon you, and you can't do it all. You can't just expand your work by 25%, and that's going to be just okay. It's not. We know that, so we need the funding model to keep pace, and those are the things that we are certainly thinking a lot about.
Just to add to that, I think I would say that, we're not bringing this slide to you to tell you how your associations should be run. That's not our role. But we want to sort of, plant a seed that this is something that, maybe should be on the horizon. And for those who haven't talked about it, it might be something to consider. There is obviously a bylaw issue that Allen's alluded to already, but as we start to see a bencher election that appears to be taking shape around fiscal restraint and keeping fees lower, frankly, the people who are advancing that narrative don't seem to be advancing any specific proposals for cuts or new revenues. Well, here's one that I think is reasonable, that is policy-based, that is linked to a statutory mandate. So, with respect, the fact that we are 4 years into a bencher election and the benchers that want to cut the budget can't identify specific cuts concerns me as a voter.
And I would just say, thank you for your comment, but we want to hear back from you, because we are you. We represent you. We only act on your behalf. So whether it's now or whether it's, at dinner tonight or whatever, I mean, this is the beauty of being back in person, is that we can have some informal discussions. There are limitations to Zoom, I acknowledge, but, we do what we have to. But now that we're here together, please don't hesitate to provide your feedback. We want that. We want to steer ourselves in a direction which is in line with our members.
And not just tonight, anytime. I'm sure everybody knows Katie's email or Kelly's email, Katie specifically. Send your feedback to Katie. You could include me, include Doug. It's not just for today. Always welcome feedback, because we're at the end of the day representing you and what's best for you.
We heard about the Lost Society secrets last year. These are FOLA secrets. So.
Thanks very much for all of that. Very helpful to associations to have something documented, perhaps a collection of information from the people who are here today as to which associations in Ontario currently have access or grant access to paralegals to the practice resource centres. It would be helpful to know which of them have paralegals as members of the associations. This is something, as you know, that I've spoken about at FOLA at the spring plenary, and it's something that our association in Middlesex we're looking at right now. That information is very important. I don't think that taking that step any longer, we can say that we're leaders in doing so, because there's been so many associations, and very good on you for those of you who are doing it, for taking that step already. But in terms of providing that information to our membership so that they can make some decisions, I would love to know if it were documented and if FOLA could coordinate that information.
Thank you for that.
Thank you for knowing.
That's great.
Thanks.